Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my HOA Karen Tales channel? Thank you so much. Red and blue police lights flash against the night sky. A cop's voice cuts through the tension. You're under arrest. The camera zooms in on Karen, HOA president extraordinaire, who stands frozen, her mouth agape. She screeches, "This is a mistake. Arrest him." The officers barely acknowledge her, turning to a bewildered Jake, the pizza delivery guy, instead. He blinks, still holding a pepperoni pizza box. All this over a delivery? Freeze frame. Voiceover. You won't believe how a simple pizza order led to Karen's ultimate downfall. Let's rewind 12 hours earlier. Jake adjusted his brand new pizza delivery hat, staring at his phone's GPS. The highway neighborhood loomed ahead, filled with pristine lawns, identical houses, and an unsettling silence. The kind of place where every blade of grass adhered to a strict homeowners association rulebook. He exhaled, gripping the steering wheel. First solo delivery. What could go wrong? Ding! His app confirmed the order. House number 223, Henderson family. He pulled into the guest parking spot, double-checking the address. Big mistake. From the shadows emerged Karen. She marched across the street, the embodiment of HOA authority, her perfectly pressed beige pants, suit screaming unapproachable power. A clipboard in one hand, phone in the other, she had the piercing eyes of a security camera that never blinked. Jake rolled down his window, offering a friendly smile. "Hey there, just delivering a pizza." Karen did not smile back. "Excuse me, you can't park there." Jake glanced at the clearly labeled guest parking sign. "Oh, I thought rules are rules," he said. Karen cut in. "No unauthorized vehicles. Do you have a parking permit?" Jake hesitated. "Well, I'm just here for a few minutes." Karen snapped a picture of his car. "This will be reported to the HOA." Jake chuckled nervously. "I mean, I could just leave in 5 minutes, or you could let me do my job." Karen's eyes narrowed. "I don't make exceptions." Before Jake could respond, she pulled out her phone. Inside house number 223, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson waited impatiently. "Where's our pizza?" Mr. Henderson groaned, checking his watch. Mrs. Henderson peeked through the window. "Oh no." They spotted Karen, arms crossed, interrogating the delivery guy. "Ugh," Mrs. Henderson exclaimed. "She's at it again." Back outside, Karen's phone was pressed to her ear. "Yes, 911. I'd like to report a suspicious man lurking outside my neighbor's house." Jake's eyes widened. "Wait, what?" She turned away, her voice dripping with fake concern. "He's loitering, looking into windows. I think he might be scoping the place out." Jake let out a disbelieving laugh. "I'm literally holding a pizza box." Karen ignored him. The Hendersons watched in horror as she just called the cops on a pizza guy. Mrs. Henderson gasped. Mr. Henderson grabbed his coat. "I'm putting a stop to this." Within minutes, police sirens pierced the night. Jake turned as 2 patrol cars pulled up, lights flashing. 2 officers stepped out, hands hovering near their belts. "Step away from the vehicle," one commanded. Jake's heart pounded. "This is insane." Karen smirked, arms crossed. Cross told you the officers approached with caution. "Sir, we received a report about suspicious activity. Can we see some ID?" Jake sighed, handing them his driver's license and work badge. "I was literally delivering a pizza." Karen butted in. "Oh, he's just saying that now. I saw him sneaking around the property." The officer raised an eyebrow. "Did you order the pizza, ma'am?" Karen scoffed. "Of course not. He's making it up." That's when Mrs. Henderson stormed out. "Officers, that pizza is ours." All heads turned. Karen froze. Mrs. Henderson pointed at the receipt in Jake's hand. "I ordered it. He's our delivery guy." A silence fell. Jake lifted the pizza box. "Extra pepperoni," he said. One of the officers exhaled, visibly annoyed. "Ma'am," he turned to Karen. "Did you knowingly make a false report?" Karen backpedaled. "Oh, I was just being cautious because he was delivering food." "How was I supposed to know that?" She snapped. The officer stared at the giant Mario's Pizza logo on Jake's shirt. Another officer sighed, stepping aside to radio in. But then his face changed. He looked back at Karen, expression darkening. "Ma'am, we need to run your name real quick." Karen blinked. "Me? Why?" The officer held up his tablet, glancing between Karen and the screen. Because it seems there's an active warrant for your arrest. A stunned silence. Karen's face drained of color. That must be a mistake. The officer ignored her, turning to his partner. Check for records on HOA disputes. Mrs. Henderson perked up. Oh, I think I know what this is about. Karen whirled around. You stay out of this. But the Hendersons didn't stay out of it. Mrs. Henderson grinned. You see, officers, Karen's been running our HOA like her personal piggy bank. We've been gathering evidence for months. Jake watched in absolute disbelief. This was better than reality TV. The officer looked at Karen sternly. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with us. Karen went ballistic. Wait, what? No, I called you. Jake, now munching on a slice of the pizza he delivered, shrugged. Well, looks like your order backfired. The entire neighborhood gathered to watch as Karen was cuffed. As she was led to the patrol car, she thrashed. You can't do this. I'm the HOA president. The officer replied, not anymore. And that was how a pizza delivery turned into Karen's downfall. But oh, it was far from over because once the HOA got involved, the real chaos began. The police sirens screamed through the quiet HOA neighborhood, lights flashing against the pristine white fences and meticulously trimmed hedges. Karen stood smugly, arms crossed, watching as two patrol cars pulled up in front of Jake's car. Jake, still holding the half-empty pizza bag, blinked. This is unreal. Two uniformed officers stepped out, their faces serious. Officer number 1 said, Sir, step away from the vehicle. Jake let out a tired sigh, but complied, raising his hand slightly. Officer number 2 said, We got a call about suspicious activity in the neighborhood. Can we see some ID? Jake reached into his pocket. Yeah, sure, but I have to ask, did she really say I was suspicious? Us Karen butted in, voice dripping with righteous indignation. I told you he was loitering. Peering into windows, Jake's jaw dropped. What? I was delivering a pizza. Karen clasped her hands to her chest, fake gasping. Oh, now he's suddenly a delivery driver. Sounds convenient, doesn't it? Officers. The first officer tilted his head. Sir, do you have proof of this delivery? Jake held up the pizza receipt like a legal document. Extra pepperoni, ordered by the Hendersons. You can literally ask them. Karen huffed. Oh, come on. Anyone can print a fake receipt these days. The second officer glanced at Jake's bright red Mario's pizza uniform, then at the giant pizza logo on his insulated bag, then back at Karen. Officer number 2, ma'am, are you serious? Inside house number 223, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson were watching everything unfold from their living room. Mrs. Henderson snapped her fingers. That woman needs to be stopped. Mr. Henderson grabbed his coat. Let's put an end to this. They stepped outside, just as Karen doubled down on her lie. Officers, I don't feel safe. He was clearly casing the house, probably planning a break-in. Jake, now beyond frustrated, threw his hands up with a pizza. Karen turned to him, narrowing her eyes. You probably weren't even going to deliver it. You were using it as a cover to snoop around. Jake blinked. Lady, this isn't a heist movie. That's when the Hendersons stepped in. Mrs. Henderson, he's our delivery guy. We ordered the pizza. Karen turned to them, mask of innocence slipping. Oh, really? Then why was he loitering? Mrs. Henderson, he was getting out his car. Karen scoffed. That's what they want you to think. Officer number 1 pinched the bridge of his nose. Ma'am, this is not a crime. Officer number 2, checking ID, said, Sir, everything checks out. Karen's smug expression faltered. Jake smirked. So am I free to go? Before the officers could answer, their radio crackled to life. Radio dispatch. Be advised, the complainant, Karen Thompson, has an active warrant. Repeat, the complainant has an active warrant. The officer stiffened. Karen froze. Wait, what? Jake's eyebrows shot up. I'm sorry, did they just say she's wanted? Officer number 1 checked his tablet, his expression darkening. Ma'am, we need to ask you some questions. Karen backpedaled. There must be a mistake. I'm the one who called you. Officer number 2 scrolled through the warrant details. His eyes widened slightly. Oh, wow. The Hendersons exchanged glances. Here we go. Officer number 1, ma'am. We have a report of outstanding HOA fraud complaints tied to your name. Several homeowners have filed grievances regarding misused HOA funds. Jake blinked. Wait, she called the cops on me while she's under investigation? Karen's entire demeanor shifted. She laughed nervously. Oh, that's just a misunderstanding. I'm the HOA president. People don't like when I enforce rules. Mrs. Henderson folded her arms. Enforce rules or embezzle HOA funds? Jake let out a low whistle. Oh, this just got good. The officer stepped toward Karen. Officer number 2, ma'am. We need you to come down to the station for questioning. Karen's eyes darted around, looking for an escape. I refuse. This is harassment, officer. Officer number 1 replied. Ma'am, we can either do this cooperatively or... Karen spun around, bolting toward her house. Jake snorted, wow, that's mature. The officers gave chase. Karen, panting, fumbled with her keys at her front door. You'll never take me alive. Before she could slam the door, officer number 2 caught her arm. Ma'am, that's enough. She let out a defeated screech as they cuffed her wrists. By now, half the neighborhood had gathered outside, watching the spectacle unfold. One neighbor whispered, Is Karen getting arrested? Another pulled out a phone and started recording. Oh, this is going viral. Karen screeched. You can't do this. I'm the HOA president. Officer number 1 replied, Not anymore. Jake, still holding his half-eaten pizza, shook his head. I came here to deliver food. Didn't expect to witness a felony. Mr. Henderson patted his back. Welcome to the neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson handed Jake a stack of bills. For your trouble and for putting up with that lunatic. Jake pocketed the giant tip, nodding. Pleasure doing business. Karen, now being loaded into the squad car, shouted at the crowd. This is a conspiracy. I demand a lawyer. A neighbor yelled back. You wouldn't even let me put up Halloween decorations, Karen. Good riddance. The whole block erupted in cheers. Karen kicked the air as the police shut the door. Jake leaned against his car, watching her get taken away. Then he looked at the Hendersons. So, do you still want your pizza? Mrs. Henderson grinned. Keep it. You earned it. And with that, the neighborhood tyrant was dethroned. But as the HOA board scrambled to clean up the mess she left behind, they'd soon realize Karen's crimes went deeper than anyone thought. Karen sat in the back of the police car, thrashing against the seatbelt, her face red with fury. This is illegal. I called you. Arrest him, she shrieked, jabbing a manicured finger toward Jake, who was still casually munching on his victory pizza. Officer number 1 sighed. Ma'am, you're being detained for questioning regarding multiple reports of HOA financial misconduct. If you resist, we will add obstruction to your charges. Karen froze for half a second, eyes darting left and right as she tried to process her next move. Then, with a deep breath, she did what she did best. She doubled down. Financial misconduct? That's a lie. I have done nothing wrong. This is a vendetta, a witch hunt. The entire neighborhood, still gathered around, burst into laughter. A neighbor recording everything called out, Oh, you mean like how you fined me $200 for having my Christmas lights up in January? Another neighbor shouted. Or how you doubled our HOA fees and refused to show us where the money went? Karen gritted her teeth. It was for community improvements. Mrs. Henderson crossed her arms. Karen, we don't even have a community pool. Where did the money go? Karen opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. She had nothing. Jake wiped his mouth with a napkin. Yeah, Karen. Where did it go? Inside the police station, Karen was dragged into an interrogation room, still fuming. Across the table sat Detective Ramirez, a no-nonsense officer who had dealt with HOA fraud cases before. She slid a thick folder onto the table. Karen Thompson, HOA president of the Evergreen Heights neighborhood, faced multiple complaints of excessive fines, financial mismanagement, and oh, this one's juicy, embezzlement. Karen forced a laugh. Please, this is ridiculous. It's just a bunch of bitter homeowners who don't appreciate structure. Detective Ramirez raised an eyebrow. You stole over $80,000 in HOA fees, Karen. Karen blinked. Excuse me? Ramirez flipped a document forward. See these transactions? Thousands of dollars being funneled from the HOA account to Karen's Community Initiatives Fund. And guess what? That account is linked directly to you. Karen swallowed hard. That's a coincidence. Ramirez smirked. Oh, so is this receipt for a week-long luxury spa retreat? You booked using HOA funds? Karen Thompson, VIP package includes unlimited massages. Karen flushed. That was for stress management. A healthy president is an effective president. Ramirez slid another paper across the table. And what about this invoice for a private security firm you hired? Personal guards with HOA money. Karen huffed. I was protecting the community. Ramirez pulled out the final document. And this is my favorite. Karen leaned forward, sweating. A $5,000 charge for legal consultation on how to remove unruly homeowners. Silence. Then Ramirez leaned in. You were literally using HOA money to figure out how to kick out the people who were paying you. Karen's lip quivered. She had nothing left to say. Back in the neighborhood, while Karen sweated it out in custody, the HOA board held an emergency meeting in the community center. Mr. Henderson, now acting HOA president, stood at the podium. All right, folks, here's the situation. Karen's gone, but the mess she left behind is huge. The crowd murmured, some worried, others just thrilled she was finally gone. We've uncovered over $80,000 in missing funds. On top of that, she's been illegally fining people, overcharging HOA dues, and forging documents to keep control of the board. A woman in the back raised her hand. So what now? Mr. Henderson smiled. We're pressing formal charges, and we're going to do something Karen never did. Actually help this community. A cheer erupted. Jake, watching from the side, chuckled. Well, that escalated. Mrs. Henderson patted his shoulder. And to think all you wanted to do was deliver a pizza. Jake laughed. Yeah, best tip I ever got. Back at the police station, Karen sat handcuffed, now looking exhausted. Detective Ramirez leaned back in her chair. Karen, you have two options. You can fight this in court, and trust me, you'll lose, or you can take a deal. Karen sniffed. What kind of deal? You plead guilty, return the money, and take a reduced sentence with community service. Karen perked up slightly. Community service? That doesn't sound too bad. Ramirez grinned. Oh, I didn't tell you, where did I? Karen hesitated. Ramirez slid a piece of paper across the table. It read, Mandatory Community Service, Mario's Pizza Delivery. Karen gasped. No, absolutely not. Ramirez smirked. Either that or jail. Your call. Karen let out a dramatic wail, slumping forward. She had no way out. 1 week later, Jake, back at Mario's Pizza, walked into the kitchen humming. The manager grinned. Guess who just started their first shift? Jake looked up, and there she was. Karen stood in an ill-fitting Mario's Pizza uniform, scowling behind the counter. Jake grinned. Well, well, well. Karen gritted her teeth. Would you like extra cheese? Jake chuckled. No, just some accountability. And just like that, hooey. Karen had finally been served. But instead of running the neighborhood, she was now taking orders, and Jake had just gotten the best revenge of all. The once feared dictator of Evergreen Heights, Karen, was no more. Her highway throne had crumbled under the weight of her greed, pettiness, and absurdly expensive spa trips paid for with community funds. The problem was she left a massive disaster behind, and now the neighborhood had to clean it up. HOA Emergency Meeting Community Center. Mr. Henderson stood at the podium, the new acting HOA president, looking out at a packed room of furious homeowners. He cleared his throat. All right, folks, let's talk about the absolute mess Karen left behind. The crowd murmured, some whispering angrily. We have over $80,000 in missing funds, someone in the back shouted. Another neighbor, arms crossed, scowled. I knew it. She never did fix the potholes she charged us for. Mr. Henderson nodded. Exactly. We found records of fraudulent fines, fake maintenance fees, and personal spending. Karen has been treating the HOA like her personal piggy bank for years. Murmurs turned into outraged shouting. She charged me $500 because my grass was too green. She banned my kid's lemonade stand and called it an unlicensed business. I got a $300 fine for having a pink flamingo in my yard. Mrs. Henderson raised her hand. Oh, and let's not forget the time she fined the Petersons because their Halloween decorations were too scary. She literally called them a community hazard. The room erupted. Karen had terrorized them for too long. The HOA uprising begins. Mr. Henderson smirked. Well, Good news. Karen's gone. And that means we get to start fresh. The homeowners leaned in, intrigued. We're doing a full investigation into the HOA books. We're reversing all of Karen's bogus fines. And we're electing a new HOA board that actually, worked for the community. A huge cheer erupted. One elderly man in the front, who had been fined $100 for having too many garden gnomes, pumped his fist in the air. Down with Karen. A chant began. Down with Karen. Down with Karen. Even Jake, standing in the back, raised his pizza box in solidarity. Karen's house. The foreclosure. Meanwhile, Karen sat alone in her now empty McMansion, surrounded by boxes of junk she had hoarded. Over the years, her bank account was frozen, her HOA dictatorship gone, and worst of all, her house was about to be repossessed. She paced frantically on the phone with her lawyer. There has to be a way to stop this. The lawyer sighed. Karen, you illegally used HOA money. You have no savings, no assets, and you're being sued by the entire neighborhood. Your house is… Ding dong. Karen froze. She turned to the door, heart pounding. Slowly, she opened it. Standing there was a foreclosure notice nailed to her door, and behind it, half the neighborhood was watching, arms crossed. Karen's face turned ghostly white. You can't do this, she shrieked. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, arms crossed. Karen, we can and we did. The neighbors erupted into applause as Karen sputtered and fumed. The Celebration HOA Freedom Party that weekend was a massive block party celebrating Karen's downfall. People who had never even spoken to each other before were now laughing, eating barbecue, and telling horror stories about Karen. A giant banner read, "Welcome to the new Evergreen Heights. HOA reform starts today." Jake, walking in with a fresh pizza, shook his head in disbelief. All this over one delivery? Mrs. Henderson grinned. Sometimes it only takes one person to set things in motion. A neighbor raised a pizza slice in salute to Jake, the pizza guy who took down Karen. The crowd cheered. Jake laughed. Man, I gotta start delivering here more often. The final nail in the coffin. Karen's new life. But where was Karen now? After being kicked out of the neighborhood she once ruled, Karen was left with nothing. No HOA, no power, no money. And worst of all, she had to work off her community service at none other than Mario's Pizza. Inside Mario's Pizza, during Karen's first shift, Jake, finishing up his last delivery, walked into the kitchen only to see Karen behind the counter wearing a Mario's Pizza uniform complete with a paper hat. Her expression was pure misery. Jake stared. Karen glared back. Don't say a word. Jake grinned. Oh, I wouldn't dare. He stepped up to the counter. Yeah, can I get a large pepperoni? Extra cheese? Karen forced the most plastic smile in human history. Sure. Would you like any dipping sauce? Jake smirked. No, just the satisfaction of knowing karma did its job. Karen threw the receipt at him. Jake walked away whistling, and with that, Karen had finally been served. Karen stormed into the courtroom dressed in a painfully outdated pantsuit, her hair frazzled and her expression set somewhere between righteous fury and full-blown panic. The courtroom was packed with neighbors, reporters, and former HOA members all gathered to watch her finally face justice. At the defendant's table, Karen sat stiffly, arms crossed, glaring at her public defender, a nervous-looking young man who clearly regretted taking this case. The charges? Judge Reynolds, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, shuffled the papers in front of her. Karen Thompson, you are being charged with embezzlement, fraud, misuse of HOA funds, and filing a false police report. I smirked. Your Honor, I would like to represent myself. Her lawyer exhaled in pure relief. Thank God. He grabbed his briefcase and got out of there like his life depended on it. Judge Reynolds blinked. Are you sure? Karen stood proudly. Absolutely. I know this community better than anyone. I was their leader. I am the HOA. The crowd burst into laughter. Jake, sitting with the Hendersons, leaned over. I got to say, this is better than Netflix. Karen's defense was a disaster in the making. Karen paced dramatically, addressing the jury like she was starring in a courtroom TV show. Ladies and gentlemen, this is all a misunderstanding. The money I used was for the community. The spa trips for stress relief, the private security to protect our beautiful streets, the excessive fines to maintain order. She slammed her hands on the table for emphasis. The prosecutor, a seasoned lawyer named Mr. Delgado, simply raised an eyebrow. Miss Thompson, are you saying that charging people $300 for having a lawn gnome was necessary? Karen nodded confidently. Absolutely. Those things are tacky. The jury gasped. An elderly woman in the front row clutched her purse, horrified. I love my gnomes. The prosecutor sighed. Miss Thompson, you personally funneled over $80,000 from the HOA fund into a private account labeled Karen's Community Initiatives. Would you care to explain why those initiatives included a week-long stay at a luxury resort in Hawaii? Karen smirked. It was a business retreat. The prosecutor held up a printed screenshot of her Instagram. It showed Karen at a private beach holding a margarita. The caption read, "Living my best life? HOA pays for everything. Hashtag winning." The courtroom exploded with laughter. Karen's face drained of color. That was taken out of context. Judge Reynolds rubbed her temples. The prosecution dropped the hammer. The next hour was a complete takedown. Witnesses testified about fraudulent fines, including a man who was billed $500 for suspiciously slow holiday decorating. A forensic accountant revealed that Karen transferred HOA funds directly to her personal account. The police officer who arrested Jake testified that Karen blatantly lied about him being a suspicious individual just because he was delivering pizza. Karen grew more frantic by the second. This is a conspiracy. Everyone is against me. The judge leaned forward. Miss Thompson, do you have any evidence to prove your innocence? Karen froze. She had nothing. The verdict: Karen gets what she deserves. After only 20 minutes of deliberation, the jury returned the verdict on the charges of embezzlement, fraud, and filing a false police report. We find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. Karen let out a dramatic wail, clutching her chest. No, this is injustice. Judge Reynolds banged her gavel. Miss Thompson, for your crimes, I sentence you to 2 years of probation, a full restitution of $80,000 to the HOA, and 800 hours of community service. Karen's jaw hit the floor. 800 hours? Judge Reynolds smirked. Yes, and per request of the victims, your community. Service will be at Mario's Pizza. Jake burst out laughing. Karen let out a full body scream. Karen's new job had a humiliating end. 1 week later, the doors to Mario's Pizza swung open. A defeated Karen stood behind the counter wearing a bright red employee shirt and a greasy apron. Her first customer? Jake. He smirked. Karen, long time no see. Karen gritted her teeth. What do you want? Jake grinned. A large pepperoni, extra cheese, and, oh, make sure it's hot this time. Karen scowled, punching the order into the register with pure hatred. As she handed him his receipt, Jake leaned in. By the way, you forgot to charge me the HOA fine for standing here too long. Karen glared. Jake winked. Guess that power trip is over. Karen threw the receipt at him. As Jake walked out, he saw a newly installed sign in front of Mario's Pizza. It read, "Now hiring, including former HOA presidents in need of community service." Underneath, a smaller sign said, "No fines, no HOA drama, just pizza." Jake snapped a picture and sent it to the entire neighborhood. A minute later, his phone exploded with laughing emojis. Karen, now stuck making minimum wage pizzas, had officially been defeated. Jake took a deep breath, smiling. Man, I love this job. It was Friday night, and Mario's Pizza was booming with customers. The restaurant was full of laughter, the smell of fresh-baked pizza, and the sound of sizzling cheese. Behind the counter, a miserable-looking Karen took orders. Her once perfect nails were now chipped, her hair tied in an unflattering bun under her red employee hat. She wore a greasy apron, and every few minutes, she had to answer the phone with a fake deadpan voice. "Thank you for calling Mario's Pizza. How can I help you?" Her soul died a little with every order. Jake's final payback arrived when the doors swung open, and in walked Jake holding a fresh cup of soda, grinning ear to ear. Karen spotted him immediately and scowled. "Oh, what now?" she groaned. Jake leaned on the counter. "Just checking in, making sure you're keeping up with those 800 hours of community service." Karen rolled her eyes. "Trust me, I know exactly how many hours I have left, 764. Jake took a sip of his drink. "You're really flying through them." Karen's jaw clenched as she wiped sauce off the counter a little too aggressively. "Are you going to order something, or are you just here to harass me?" Jake grinned. Yeah, I think I'll go large pizza, but make sure it's done right. Since last time you were more focused on ruining my life than making food." Karen gritted her teeth. "Fine." She punched in the order a little too hard on the register. 20 minutes. Jake leaned in. "Oh, and can you make sure the crust is crispy? And can I get a side of ranch? Oh, and can you cut it into perfect even slices? Because I know how much you love perfection." Karen's eye twitched. Meanwhile, outside, the HOA-free community was thriving. The head Anderson had officially reformed the HOA, removing all of Karen's insane fines and rules. No more ridiculous lawn fines. No more petty complaints about Halloween decorations. No more mandatory HOA-approved beige houses. People were painting their doors bright colors, putting garden gnomes everywhere, and best of all, they were happy. A new community sign stood proudly at the entrance. "Welcome to Evergreen Heights, a carefree community." Underneath, in small letters, it warned, "HOA Karens will be fined for existing." The neighborhood cheered as they celebrated their first ever HOA-free event, a block party. Jake walked into the party, greeted with high fives and endless pizza. "Our hero," someone shouted. Mrs. Henderson handed him a custom-made shirt. It read, "Pizza HOA Karma." "I just wanted to deliver a pizza." Jake laughed. "Oh, I'm wearing this forever." Karen hits rock bottom. Back at Mario's, Karen's shift was finally over. She ripped off her greasy apron, storming toward the exit. But just as she reached the door, her parole officer appeared. "Ah, Karen," he shook his head. "You forgot your trash duty." Karen groaned. "You have got to be kidding me." He handed her a mop and trash bags. Karen looked like she wanted to scream. The final humiliation. The next morning, Karen was assigned another task. The city had officially ordered her to remove all her own HOA violation signs from the neighborhood. So there she was, in an ugly orange vest, pulling down her own no holiday decor before December 15 signs. As she yanked one out of the ground, a familiar voice called out, "Oh, careful, Karen. Wouldn't want to find yourself." Karen whipped around. Jake stood there, sipping a soda, enjoying every second. Karen glared. "I hate you." Jake grinned. "You and the rest of your Yelp reviews." The legend of HOA Karen lives on. Months passed, and the story of HOA Karen became legendary. Jake's Pizza Shop got more business than ever. The neighborhood thrived without Karen, and Karen, well, let's just say that people never let her live it down. One day, as Jake pulled up for a delivery, a new pizza shop poster caught his eye. It read, "Fire Karen Special. One large pizza, but we call the cops on you before you can eat it." Jake burst out laughing. Police, Garrett. And that, my friends, is a story of how a pizza delivery took down the worst HOA president in history. So now we got to ask you, what's the worst HOA horror story you've ever heard? Drop your craziest HOA Karen experiences in the comments. And hey, if you love this story, make sure to like this video. If you believe in HOA karma, subscribe for more wild stories like this one. Share this video with anyone who's ever had to deal with a nightmare HOA. Because if there's one thing we've learned, never mess with the pizza guy, pizza police, Garrett, the end police Garrett.